Hello everyone, I'm Peter McMillan from Shelter, and we're broadcasting today from the lands of the Larrakia people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to any other First Nations people who may be watching this episode. This is episode 4 of Sharing the Couch, and it's an initiative where we bring on to this program a number of people from across Australia and closer to home who can talk about their perspectives on housing and homelessness, the great work that they're doing, and their thoughts as to what can be achieved from here. And today we are sharing the couch with Wendy Morton, and I'll introduce Wendy in just a moment. But in terms of what sharing the couch means, obviously we've got another person online, so it is a virtual couch, but also a reference to couch surfing, which is one of those hidden forms of homelessness that affects many young people across the territory and many not so young people. And it's a form of homelessness that many of us often don't see day to day, but is a real challenge in terms of providing housing to those who most need it. Over the next fortnights, we're planning to produce a podcast every Thursday, every second Thursday, I should say. And we have a number of really great guests lined up, so don't miss out. Go to our YouTube channel, so just Google NT Shelter YouTube, and you'll find these episodes, and subscribe if you can, and so you make sure that you don't miss out on any by hitting that subscribe button, and you'll see them as they're released coming through. So today, as I mentioned, Wendy Morton is our guest, and Wendy has been a tireless advocate for vulnerable Territorians now for more than 2 decades, including 14 years as a former executive director of the Northern Territory Council of Social Services. Wendy's been involved in strategic decision-making and policy development on a range of issues impacting on vulnerable groups during that time, including alcohol, housing, disabilities, mental health, youth justice and child protection. Her wealth of experience also includes 8 years as a disability discrimination advocate and outreach worker at Darwin Community Legal Service. Prior to that, she worked primarily in the disability sectors in the Northern Territory and Queensland. Wendy has also worked as a consultant and has been a member of several Northern Territory government advisory groups. And I think from memory, we'll come to those in a moment, but some of those have been associated with Team Territory, the economic reconstruction initiatives in the Northern Territory, as well as skills and economics committees with the Northern Territory government. In August last year, Wendy was appointed as a Community Housing Registrar NT under the Community Housing Providers National Uniform Law 2013 Act. Wendy calls Darwin home. She's originally hails from Brisbane, and among her many interests, she's a lover of most things sport, animals, books, jigsaws, and chilling out, which is just wonderful. And we also know that Wendy was a nifty tennis player and has apparently survived a croc attack at Dundee Beach. Wendy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Peter. You've done quite a lot of research there.
Look, it's not hard to find. I mean, you're obviously a tried and tested and true blue Territorian, having survived a croc attack. Just what was going on there?
Short story, but we were out at Dundee fishing. I heard my partner at the time say, "Wend, run." I looked down and there was a croc about, I don't know, a bit over a metre away from me coming out of the water. And I ran, probably faster than I'd run in a long time.
Gosh.
And a very Territory experience.
Very much so. Did you have a frying pan to hit it on the head with or something?
No, I didn't. But, from now on, having seen that video last week, I'll carry a frying pan.
Fantastic.
I've never actually fished off the beach again.
I love it. I tell you what, better you than me. That's all I can say. You're probably a faster runner with all that tennis training you did too.
It was, I don't think I'd run that fast in a while. It had been a while since the tennis training, but it all kicked in.
My goodness, I reckon it would too. Well, we're glad you're still with us because you've done a lot of great work since. But I just want to start, I guess, by going back to the fact that you were, I guess, a Brisbane girl originally, grew up there and went to school around Kelvin Grove and Albany Creek High. And did arts and community welfare, amongst other things, through your education. So I guess I'm interested in how you got involved in community welfare and a social justice stream. What was it that attracted you to that area?
Yeah, look, I think there was two things. One, I actually went to university originally to do journalism, as my father had been a journalist, but ended up I was doing some work for a particular subject and ended up volunteering for a disability organisation, and realising really quickly that I really enjoyed the work and wanted to do more of that. And I think a lot of it actually goes back to I had a cleft palate when I was born, which required lots of surgeries and lots of speech therapy. And I think as a child, when you speak differently or anything's different about you, you can feel the sense of being different to other people and whatever. And also, I had a father who was legally blind all of my growing up, and later on in life was completely blind. So I guess that really impacted on our family dynamics and the relationships. So I think those things all combined probably gave me a sense of feeling what it was like to be a little bit different.
Sure.
Although, acknowledging now that I had it pretty easy compared to a lot of people. But I think that sort of initially inspired some of the work in the disability services. And then I guess that starting to work in that area and realising, the injustice that some people face, and whether that be discrimination or the inability or the difficulties of getting ahead when one was living in poverty, and seeing the impact on people. So when I first came to the Territory, I was still working in disability services and ended up getting a job at Darwin Community Legal Service as a disability discrimination advocate. And it was just mind-blowing, really. I guess all of the things that the legal service were doing, and then I got to get involved in, and we started campaigns around new buildings that were happening in town and trying to get access for people. And we were doing, different campaigns. There was campaigns at the time around Jabiluka and for people who'd been arrested out at Jabiluka. And so I got exposed to all these, really different social justice issues that were happening across the Territory, and had some fabulous mentors along the way, but particularly Cassandra Goldie, who is now the head of ACOS, was the head of Darwin Community Legal Service when I started. And she was this fabulous mentor to me, and gave me lots of opportunity, and took me with her to meetings with the ministers, for example, and got me exposed to that. And I was just on the weekend found a letter to the editor that I wrote when I was at Darwin Community Legal Service about a particular issue, and another one that I wrote back when I was living in Rockhampton around access to women's shelters. And so I think, having people around you who really include you and mentor you and expose you to things was something that I was really fortunate to have happen. So those first few years at Darwin Community Legal Service, having Cassandra around, and then the next few years that I was there was Caitlin Perry, who again was a really great mentor to me, and really encouraged me to go for the role at NTCOS, and I think that background at Darwin Community Legal Service, that advocacy role that I had there, really gave me a really good background for going to NTCOS, and also that interaction with the law at Darwin Community Legal Service again gave me that structure of how to I guess analyse things at times, and how to approach it, but also the power that law reform could have. And when I was at DCLS, we near the end there was a gay and lesbian law reform project that ended up, I think it was something like 7 out of 10 reforms went through with the then really new Labor government. And that was so exciting and motivating to see actual change in law that would impact and really change people's lives. And so that, those experiences, I guess, propelled me to want to keep going in that kind of area.
That's fantastic, Wendy. And I guess just going back to the comment that you made before about, when you were young, and the I guess the blindness that your father experienced, and your challenges as well. Did you have, I guess looking back now, do you feel, or even at the time, did you feel that you were getting the services and the supports that you needed back then for disability?
Yeah. Look, I think on the whole, yes. I guess as a child, I probably don't know how difficult it was for my my parents at the time. And I'm sure I was the youngest of four, and I think there was a lot of, that made it really difficult for my parents in terms of the support other children required. I think in some way we did get access because we were probably, fairly middle class, white privileged sort of family who did get access to speech therapy and, dental services, all the things that come along with having cleft palate. But I think one of the things I probably did miss out on at times was understanding the impact on me and understanding the impact on my family. And I think one of the things that did get me through was my family was really strong and supportive, but also I had good friends who were really supportive of me, and teachers, I think, in primary school who were supportive. Although I did just have a look at some school reports recently and see that I was getting a C for communication skills, which I thought was a little bit unfair. But anyway,
a bit harsh, perhaps. Yeah,
a bit
absolutely.
harsh. In some way, I think we did get the services that we needed. But again, I think that had a lot to do with the ability of my parents to find the services and get them, and at times to be able to afford them when we needed them too.
Sure.
And I know one time when I was back working in disability, hearing a parent talk about in the space of 3 years, their child had something like 15 different speech therapists. And it's hard to, improve when your speech therapist would be continually changing. And I'm sure that there was times when there was no access at all to speech therapy. So I think I was really lucky in that sense, but also really aware that, not everybody would be so lucky.
Sure. And in terms of you making that decision to go into social work at university, I know you did other things, had a lot of other interests as well, but was that because you felt that you had something you could offer having gone through that experience, or was it out of, I guess, anger that you think people should be treated better, or there should be better rights for people? I mean, what was it that really wanted you to get into that? What was the driver there? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think maybe a bit of all of that, having some sense of, the impact the things had on me and some understanding of that. But also, at the time when I was working in Rockhampton, I worked. It was my first real time of being really exposed to issues affecting Aboriginal people, really. Yeah. And some of the people I worked with, they were some Aboriginal women who were working on the riverbank in Rockhampton with people who were homeless. And they would come to meetings at work having all of these terrible things happening within their families, all of these pressures, and they were still willing to really support me and educate me on things that were happening. And I used to think these women, they were so incredibly strong. And I think part of that really inspired me, because they really exposed me to some of the challenges that were out there and things that were happening for people. So yeah, some of that anger, I think, and then various things that would happen along the way, and then you'd realise the injustice of it, and that would spur you on, and I think I've maintained that, I think, pretty much the whole way through, and an entry cost to be exposed to so many injustices that were out there, and so many good people also wanting to do something about it, so I think, it was a mix of both.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off there, but I'm just curious as well that, you know so many people over that period of time, where you met so many people within our sector, the human services sector. I'm curious as to whether you have a sense for how many people are motivated to go into our sector because they've had an experience either for themselves or with a family member or a close friend where they feel that's not right. I feel like I can make a contribution in that area, and that drives them. Do you have a sense for that?
Yeah, I think there are, quite a lot of people who end up with that. And I think it's really important when you're doing that to in some way have not resolve the issues for the reasons why you come in, but have an understanding of those and then be able to go out there and share that knowledge and that experience that you've had. I think one of the major changes in our sector over the last 20, 30 years is the encouragement of people who've had lived experience to come and work in the sector and learn from that. And that's a definite change. I've seen. I mean, even in the last 10 years, that real reflection of, if we want to do this better, we have to include people who've got lived experience in our policy making, in our direct service delivery, and we have to hear from those who've experienced it themselves. And then I think a certain element of that, for people, is also that anger and the wanting to do something about it, and acknowledging that you're in a privileged position in order to be able to do something about it. And I'm probably like many that, you don't. It's only when you look back that you realise that you had a pretty privileged position growing up. Despite whatever challenges my cleft palate gave me, and that ability then to go, okay, now I can give back. And I think that's yeah. So I'd say there's a bit of a mix of people.
Sure. It's interesting that there are many different roles within the sector, and you could have, I guess, been more at the clinical perspective or the caseworker perspective, and you've ended up in advocacy. And I'm sure the time at DCLS would have been formative in that decision. But it's quite a different role, isn't it, to get out and to be an advocate as opposed to just being a frontline worker. And you mentioned Cassandra Goldie and the impact she's had as a mentor. I'm curious as to her impact and maybe, I guess, how you end up being such a leading advocate in the Northern Territory.
I do think that experience of having been a direct service worker, I think, is really important, and it's not essential if you want to do advocacy. But gee, I think there were so many times when that gave me an understanding of what it was like to work on the front line, and to have worked so directly with people. And some of my greatest working moments were working directly with people with disabilities and the relationships that I formed with them and their families, and some that continue today when I run into them in the supermarket and get to hear how their son or daughter is going or how they're going. And so they were some fabulous moments, and it really did, I think, give me a good grounding then in understanding there's all different perspectives on what's happening out there. And so having worked in different roles, I think, was really important. And so yes, and then for Cassandra, it was I mean, one, it was this initial thing that she believed in that I had something to contribute to the discussion, and then that people took the time to really educate me about the law and the impact that the law could or did have on people, and then that, starting off going into meetings as somebody's advocate and working with them, and I guess that ability to support somebody to do the advocacy themselves was also a really big part of it. So that was part of it, and I think Cassandra also gave me this sense of you work on individual matters for somebody, but the biggest impact was going to be when you changed the system at a higher level, and whether that was changing the law or a policy, that could have such a massive, massive impact on people. And we see that in the negative as well. So, when we think about the impact of the intervention, for example, that it has on such a broad number of people. And then we see when there's, again, going back to that gay and lesbian law reform, that completely could change people's lives and their safety within a community just because of a bit of change to the law. So I think so I was then really inspired to want to change it at the systemic level rather than sort of focus on that individual level. And whilst I have, such great memories of working directly in disability support roles. And there were some people I think I worked really well with, and then others that I used to think, oh, maybe this isn't for me. And it's hard work. It's probably one of the hardest roles I've ever done, and the the risk associated with it as well. When you're working directly with people and what that involves, and but yes, I think I did. I love the strategy and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And there would have been some big wins during that time, as well as some challenges and frustrations, no doubt. It's often a tough slog trying to get change through systemic issues. What are some of the things that you learnt during that time that helped get big things through government and getting big systemic change? What are the success factors there?
I think having a sense of who the audience is and who it is that you need to change, or get them to understand, want to change the bit of law or whatever it is. And so being really clear on that. I think relationships are so important, and that ability to maintain relationships and create relationships, even if you're on different pages, that's really important. And I've always said that you can agree to disagree and still maintain and develop a relationship. But once you lose the relationship, it's really hard then to get change. And I think having all of the people involved in needing that change. So I don't think of an example, but like I'm just thinking, even when we were, you and I, back in my Anticost days, when we were trying to get change around the efficiency dividend and how that would impact on organisations, of making sure that we had all of the key players around the table and then leveraging those relationships. So I had relationships with some ministers, whereas you had them with others, and so to be able to kind of use that jointly to effect that change and to ensure that we're all on the same page. And I guess another one is preparation. And one of the biggest things to happen in my time at Anticost towards the end was the Royal Commission. It was the initial Four Corners report into youth justice, and we were part of a group called Making Justice Work. And we'd been doing lots of work over many years around what changes to the justice system should look like. And we knew that this Four Corners report was coming up. And we did a whole lot of work in the days beforehand to make sure that we were ready, thinking, there might be a little bit of interest from this program, and, making sure that the Facebook page or the website was up to date, and making sure that we were really clear on the ask and we had everybody on the same page. But equally, there was things that we had dismissed as not being one of our asks because we thought it wouldn't be possible. And I'm forever grateful that we had done that work before the Four Corners program happened, because I don't think my phone had ever rung more the next day after that Four Corners report. But what was really important, we were ready. And so in doing media the next day or the weeks that followed, or the meetings with government, we were really ready for that. And so I think that preparation was incredibly important, and that we had everybody on the same page. And so we had done so much background work on it so that we were ready, and to be able to take advantage of that when the opportunity was there. And ironically, sometimes with really big change, there has to be some kind of incident that happens in order to make it happen. And ours was the Four Corners report. And so you don't know when that's going to happen, but when it happens, you want to be ready. And that was hugely important.
Absolutely. It was a real watershed moment, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was.
Yeah. And for those of us who were living in a state like myself at the time, that seemed to come out of the blue, and it's such a shock to see that. But obviously, like you said, being prepared and having I guess being ready in terms of what was needed after that was released, and it would have been a very crazy time probably in terms of the level of interest, as you've said. Yeah, when I'm interested about our sector, the housing and homelessness sector. I know you would have, as part of your role at NTCOS, had certainly had carriage for that as part of a number of different areas within the social services sector. Do you think the role that our members and I guess their frontline staff do, the work that they do at the front end, do you think that the work of our sector is fully understood by government, the importance of what they do in I guess preventing homelessness and getting people housed?
No, look, I guess it's probably appreciated by some elements of government who understand it and appreciate it. I guess more broadly, probably no, throughout the government more broadly, or the community as a whole. I think there's often I don't want to know much about it. I just want to know that somebody else is doing it, and it only becomes a focus when something's going wrong, and that's when we might sort of appreciate it. But no, I don't think it is recognised, and I think the NGO sector in general, community services sector in general, is not well respected for the for the work that people do, and I think that's reflected often, for example, in the wages of the sector, which aren't as high as some other industries. And I don't think I think one of the things that's not appreciated is the amount that it, for example, we just want to talk in economic terms, the amount that it saves government through other systems, and so that if people are living in stable housing and getting the support that they need, chances are it's going to reduce the burden on the health system and the criminal justice system and other interacting things. So I don't think people fully appreciate the amount of money that's saved by the sector, so that when we talk about the amount of money that's invested in the sector, people just see it as money that's invested and never seen again, whereas it's actually, one, preventing a whole lot of other economic impacts, but also the sector invests back into the community. So most people who work in the community services sector in the Northern Territory live here, work here and spend their money here. So I think, so one, yes, not fully appreciated, and two, don't really fully understand the important role in the economy that the sector plays.
So it sounds like we've got some more work to do there for sure. I am interested in terms of the 20 years that you've been in the, I guess, territory doing those various roles, and I guess particularly during the last 14 when you were in that role of executive director at NTCOS. Looking back, as you mentioned a couple of times, do you think we have moved forward in that time? And the reason I ask that is often on a day-to-day or month-by-month or year-by-year basis, often people get a little bit dispirited and think things will never change, or things will always be like this. Have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I definitely think things have changed. And I mean, just on that, I think a really important thing is to appreciate the little wins, because yes, we don't get huge amounts of wins, and so it's important to take the time to appreciate them when you get them and celebrate them. But I do think things have changed, and I'll just give one example that 10 years or so ago, maybe longer, the Department of Business would not have seen the NGO sector as part of the economy. And now, over the last 5-10 years, they've had numerous programs, either more generally for NGOs or specific, they had a specific program for NDIS at one point. And so I think the recognition of the role that the sector plays within, for government has really changed. And I think, I mean, look, for on the whole, I think that there's been lots of things that have improved. I know for many individuals that that may not feel that way, but if we look at things, even the emergence of things such as Aboriginal Housing NT, and to now be well funded and supported by government and recognised by government as a really key player in improving housing for Aboriginal people, then I think we can, take those wins of going, okay, there's an understanding. And when I was mentioned before about including people's lived experience in the discussion, that's just so important, and I think has led to lots of significant change in some areas like mental health, and that will continue to change. And in some of those things, I guess we're on the beginning of a journey, and the frustration can be that we make all these improvements and then government changes and we go backwards a few steps. But I guess we have to think of those wins and then keep fighting when we go backwards, and appreciate when we have the wins.
Yeah, you're right. There are some good examples there of things that have changed even in just the last few years. So it's good to remember that, isn't it? When things are hard. So Wendy, you got after a long time in NTCOS, you finished in 2019. You did some stuff on a consultancy base. I know you worked at a number of NGOs as acting executive officer while they were filling positions and the like. So you're busy. You never really stopped. And then you get the call about the community housing registrar's role. You want to tell us about how you felt when you got that call and what happened from there?
I think there was an element of, what does that role do? and so there was a definite, could you send me some information so I can understand more of what the role does? And I have joked a few times that if it had been, amongst a whole lot of other jobs, it's probably not one that I would have looked at and thought that this is for me. But that opportunity to sit down with government and talk it through, and I was really clear to the beginning, saying, if you're wanting someone who's just going to look at the regulations and that's all, then I'm probably not your person. But if you want someone who's going to engage with the sector more broadly and play that sort of role, then I'd love to do it. And fortunately for me, that's what they were after. But it did take me a while initially to really understand, what the role was. And I think that the fun part and scary part as well was that up until this point, the role had always been done by somebody in government as a bit of an add-on, and there wasn't actually, it never been much of an investment in the role. So this was the first time having an independent person in the role. And so what it meant in many ways was that I got to create what the role looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some way I'm still sort of working some of that out. But it's been, a little bit scary, a little bit fun to actually create the role and work out where to sort of invest my time and where I can make the most difference.
Okay. And we'll get into nitty-gritty of the role in just a minute, but in terms of, I guess, the skills and experience you'd had from the sector over those many years, have you been able to kind of bring some of that thinking towards this role?
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think one thing I brought is the relationships with the sector and with government, and to be able to now engage with those organisations, albeit in a different role, but having a really good understanding, I think, of what they already do, and has been really helpful for me. And I think one of the bits of experience that I can bring is knowing or wanting to sort of help grow the sector, and knowing and understanding how important creating a community housing sector will be in terms of addressing some of the issues, going some way to address homelessness in the Northern Territory. I think the other part, which I know it's not so directly result maybe for my role, but is understanding where community housing fits in the broader spectrum of housing and homelessness in the Northern Territory, but more broadly, because it's so hard to tackle all the other issues, whether it be the impact of alcohol or mental health or disability or whatever it may be, if people don't have stable housing. And so also understanding that context, I think, is really important for the role. And I think you can look at it and go, well, actually it doesn't matter, but I think it does, to understand where community housing fits and why it's so important, and hopefully be then a good spokesperson, or I hesitate to use the word advocate now, but someone who's going to really want to play a key role in growing the sector, and in growing the sector in a way that's really sustainable for both the sector and for government.
It's interesting because your role, as I understand it, you kind of it's a government funded role, but you have a reporting relationship through, but you're not like a typical agency staff member, are you? You've got a level of independence.
Yeah, so I'm not actually a employee of Northern Territory Government, which I think does really help in maintaining the independence of the role, whilst also having obviously a relationship with government. They're paying my wages, and I'm appointed by government, and I think they can get rid of me at any time as well. So there's obviously that relationship. But I think the experience actually at Entry Costs has maybe helped me with this. It seems kind of easy to me that both government and the sector are my key stakeholders in this, and to be able to have that relationship with government is really important, and whilst also being able to maintain some independence to that. So yes, it's actually a different setup to most of the other registrars across the country, and I'm learning the challenges and the benefits of that as we go along. But yeah, I think it's working quite well so far.
Terrific. Now, as we record this, the government's announced that it's planning to transfer up to 40% of its urban stock to registered community housing providers over the next 5 years. That's quite a period of change for tenants as well, I guess. And a few people might be thinking, what does this mean for me. And I guess you would have seen over your time many big change programs having to be put through. Do you get the opportunity in your role to, I guess, have a bit of a look, an independent look at how that's being handled to make sure the transition goes smoothly? Because there might be some fears out there about what does community housing mean and what will it look like for me.
Yeah. And look, I do get the opportunity to provide my thoughts on, for example, the community growth strategy that was developed by government and the transfers. And I mean, ultimately it's government who make the decisions, but yes, I've had the opportunity to comment, and I think it's I mean, it is really exciting to think that really significant transfer of public housing will happen over the next 2 years, and I do think that there's so much evidence to show that the community housing sector can manage some of these things better than government, and they tend to have much closer relationships with their tenants, and I guess one of the things about the community housing regulations is around the expectations of organisations. So whilst government, for whatever reason, really struggles to turn around properties in a really short space of time, the community housing sector has requirements on them to be pretty speedy in some of those things, and pretty speedy with the maintenance and following up on issues. And, in order to maintain their compliance, they need to be doing those things. So I think that there'll be challenges ahead for community housing organisations, and it's not going to magically resolve every issue for tenants or government or the community that are out there. But I think it will. I'm looking forward to it happening and hopefully seeing a lot of change for tenants. And ultimately, this is around providing better outcomes for tenants across the Northern Territory, and hopefully as well, as we go along, more housing for people. And that's at the centre of everything that's happening. And so I think that's really important that we remember that this is actually about hopefully getting better outcomes for people. I guess we can look at the numbers of people in the Territory who are without stable housing now, and know that we have to do some different things in order to improve that. And one is providing better support to people to maintain their housing. And so I think community housing organisations in the Territory are in a really good position to do that.
Sure. And when you're backtracking a little bit here in terms of your work with the Territory Economic Reconstruction Commission and Team Territory, but I was somewhat encouraged by some of the wording from the report there around the importance of social and affordable housing. It seems to me that people in there do have an understanding, do get some of this stuff, that we need to have an effective, sustainable housing system if we're going to realise our growth. Have you got any comments on that?
No, look, I think that's right. I think that governments and politicians of all flavours are realising the importance of community housing and housing more generally, affordable housing more generally for people, and recognising that it's so difficult to resolve all of these other issues if we don't actually provide stable housing for people, and whatever that sort of looks like, whether that be some crisis immediate sort of housing or more long-term housing. And I think also governments everywhere are also realising the cost of living issues that certainly the Territory experiences, and I know everyone's experiencing it at the moment, but it's tough. And then I think added to that, I might be going off track, but I think we all realise the complexity of housing in the Territory, particularly once we come to remote, and it takes a long time, and it's expensive, and it's hard. But also realising that and this is where I think the Territory Economic Reconstruction Commission was coming from, of realising that in order to grow the economy, particularly outside of the urban centres, housing is a key part of that. And recognising that role of, we can't get all these people to come to the Territory if we don't actually have housing for them, and we can't grow the economy in remote areas if people don't have housing.
Absolutely. That's really, really important, isn't it? And you would hope that it's self-evident, but sometimes we do need to remind people that don't forget about housing. Exactly right. Now, Wendy, there might have been a little bit of confusion around your role, in the sense that a lot of community housing providers that have been up here for a while think, well, finally we've got a chance to grow and get and manage some stock, former public housing stock, and that's great. And I think there's a acknowledgement from government as well that they want to see that happen as well. But ultimately, we have had a bit of a mini explosion in the number of registered housing providers now that I guess it's your role to register. But if I'm understanding correctly, you don't actually decide yourself as to who gets stock and who doesn't. Do you want to talk us through what your role involves and what it doesn't involve?
Okay. So in my role as registrar, so part of the role is around registering new organisations. So we work closely with the Office of the Registrar in New South Wales to do that registration process and then compliance. And so for new organisations, and we've had a couple of new ones come on board in the last couple of months since I've been in the role, who are Northern Territory based, and that's really exciting. And then if organisations are registered in other parts of Australia, so for example, we've got 4 organisations now who have been registered in other locations and who then have decided they also want to work in the Northern Territory. And so if they're registered elsewhere, then they're, other than advising me, they're then able to, really the path is then clear for them to work in other locations. I guess a really key part of understanding the difference, though, in the role to that of government is that so the government makes decisions around funding. And so ultimately it will be for the Northern Territory government to decide who they're going to fund in order to, as part of their growth strategy. So in terms of the public housing transfers, who will win that is ultimately up to government. And I have no role in that. I don't hear any of the information. I don't sit on any of the assessment panels. And I think it's really important that we keep those 2 roles really separate. So, my role is there around regulation and compliance. Government makes those decisions as to who to fund. So, we might end up with, 15 or 20 or 30 providers, but at the end of the day, government will make the decision who they fund. And then I guess what I see as really other key, really important parts of my role is to, one, when New South Wales are doing their registration and compliance assessments, that I can provide the context that those organisations are working in. And knowing that if you're an organisation in Darwin or Katherine or Tennant Creek or Nhulunbuy, the context that you're working in is often really different to those in New South Wales or anywhere else in Australia. And so I see that I've got a really important role at each point of the process to provide the context. And then also in terms of, the state and territory registrars work together on a whole lot of issues. And in that, I see that I've got a really important role again to raise the issues things that happen in the Northern Territory that are quite different elsewhere. So one of the things I'm working on with that I'm leading a project with other registrars at the moment is around increasing the number of Aboriginal controlled organisations who become registered under the legislation, so become community housing providers. So actually in the Territory, we actually probably have a higher percentage than anywhere else in Australia, but it's really important that in some of the other parts of the Northern Territory where there's not yet providers, that we provide the support needed for Aboriginal organisations to achieve that registration. And sometimes that may be, just providing some capacity support for that to happen. But I think the other question we have to look at is, does the current system meet the needs of Aboriginal people? And I want to be a good advocate in that way to pass on information and influence if it means that there needs to be change in order for Aboriginal organisations to become registered and also continue to meet the compliance, because at the end of the day, that's again what's going to produce the best outcomes for Aboriginal people in the Territory.
Absolutely, very well said, Wendy. And we do want to see Aboriginal housing back in Aboriginal hands when we can, and that's part of the local decision making framework. It's part of self-determination, and it's an aspiration that's very important from all of us that are working in that space. So I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts today, and congratulate you on the impact you've had over such a long time, 20 years plus in the Northern Territory. I've no doubt that you'll be able to continue to use those relationships that you referred to and your influence to successfully see some change, some much needed change really in our housing sector with the growth of a new industry essentially. It's very exciting. We've got the Community Housing Industry Development Plan, which is being worked on at the moment, which you mentioned before. There seem to be a lot of reasons to have some optimism that we can and will do better than what we've done before, albeit, of course, having a long way to go. And I must also say, I noticed you perked up a few times there when you were telling some of those stories when you're at DCLS and that. So I can see that passion and enthusiasm is definitely there. So thank you for joining us today. Make sure you stay away from Crocs at Dundee Beach because we need you around for a little bit longer yet, I can assure you. And thank you once again for sharing the couch with us today.
Thanks, Peter. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Thanks, Wendy. You've been listening to Wendy Morton, the Community Housing Registrar in the NT. We've had a really great conversation about Wendy's time in the Territory, including her time as Executive Director at NT Cost for 14 years and some of the work she's been doing more recently. So this has been episode 4 of Sharing the Couch. Please continue to follow as we release new episodes over the coming weeks. Every second Thursday is the plan. So do subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up to date with the latest thought leaders and contributors to housing and homelessness from both here in the Territory and further afield. Thank you for watching our podcast, and we'll see you next time.